And Councillor Russell, you are now live on YouTube.
Great, thank you very much. I'd like to welcome everybody. Good morning. It is March 9th. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Audit Committee meeting. It is 10:03 a.m. and I'd like to call this meeting to order. My name is Paul Russell and I represent Lower Sackville. I'd also like to acknowledge that the Halifax Regional Municipality is located in Mi'kma'ki, the traditional and unceded lands of the Mi'kmaq people. The municipality acknowledges the peace and friendship treaties signed in this territory and recognizes that we are all treaty people. Now, as is standard with the virtual meetings, I'd like to go around the room and just make sure that we have everybody's audio and video working correctly. So good morning, Claude. How are you doing?
Good morning. How are you?
We're doing great, thanks you.
Great.
Carolyn, good morning. How are you doing?
Yes, good morning. Very good. You?
Doing well, thank you. Councillor Dago Gammon from District 1, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, colleagues, staff, and anyone from the public that's listening.
Good morning. And Councillor Hensby, District 2, good morning.
Good morning, sir. I'm here.
Good stuff. Thank you. And Councillor Purdy, District 4, good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Mr. Chair.
And Councillor Cleary, District 9, good morning.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, colleagues and members of the committee.
And Councillor Morse, District 10, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, one and all.
And the mayor has, I don't see that he has joined us yet. So we do have a number of staff members as well with us in the meeting. So that is phenomenal. Thank you very much for all of the help that everybody is giving today. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of July 21st, 2021. That seems like an awful long time ago. So can I have a motion to approve the minutes of July 21st, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Dago Gammon. Thank you, Councillor Cleary, for seconding that. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all in favor of the minutes of July 21st, please signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. All opposed, say nay. Great, thank you. The next item is the approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions. Annie, good morning.
Good morning, Councillor. The clerk's office did not receive any requests for additions or deletions for this meeting.
Okay, thank you. So can we have a motion, please, to approve the order of business as presented?
So moved, Councillor Cleary.
Thank you,
Second.
Councillor Cleary. Thank you, Councillor Morse, for seconding that. Are there any changes from the committee? Okay, all in favor of the order of business as presented, please signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. All opposed, say nay. Great, thank you. That passes. We have an agenda. Call for declaration of conflicts of interest. And not seeing any. Let's move ahead with the audit of the consolidated financial statements of HRM for March 31st, 2022. This is item 5 on the agenda. And we do have a presentation for this item, so I'm going to hand it over to the clerk and to Carrie and Rebecca.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Good morning. We can hear you, we can see you, and we can see the first slide.
Excellent. Excellent. We've circulated a presentation and a report that outlines our audit plan for the current fiscal year being March 31st, 2022. This plan is for the audit of the consolidated financial statements of the Halifax Regional Municipality. And it includes not just the operations of the municipality itself, but also the related entities that are deemed to be controlled by the Halifax Regional Municipality through the accounting standards, which are public sector accounting standards. With you today is myself, the lead engagement partner, Carrie Blair, which is on page 3, if we scroll down. and Rebecca Struthers, who is the audit manager, who will be helping lead the audit. In the presentation, if we go to page 4, or slide 4, I should say, we have an executive summary. Thank you. The executive summary provides a high-level outline of our audit plan for the current year. What you will note is there are no significant or unusual changes that have arose either through the adoption of new accounting standards or through the adoption of new audit rules for the current year. We've not identified any areas of significant risk that we need to highlight to the committee as new or unusual in the current year. Our audits are based on the concept that we provide reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free from material misstatement. And in doing that, we need to determine what an appropriate level of materiality is. And we have done that, and we'll go over that in page 4 for the consolidated financial statements as a whole. And we've also outlined in this presentation our proposed fees, which are consistent with the fees that would have been included in our schedule the last time the audit was out to proposal. The next slide talks to how we deliver audit quality. All I would note here is in the presentation that was provided to you, there is a link to our external website that deals with how we address audit quality, which includes our transparency report. That report outlines the things that we as a professional services firm do to ensure, one, that we're in compliance with auditing standards, as well as using leading practices to deliver audit quality to our clients. The next slide outlines the scope. As I mentioned, this is the consolidated financial statements of the Halifax Regional Municipality. The most significant component of that audit would be the Halifax Regional Municipality's operations itself, including the operating and capital budgets. Another important and significant area of the audit is the Halifax Regional Water Commission, which is audited by an independent firm that we provide direction through group audit instructions to, as to our expectations as to what they need to do so that we can get reasonable assurance from an audit perspective that they are free from material misstatement for the purposes of consolidation. We do that through coordination with Grant Thornton in Halifax. There are a few other in-scope components which have been listed there. They are more significant facilities that exist within the HRM that we do some procedures ourselves to satisfy that there aren't any residual risks that exist within those entities from a financial reporting point of view. And there are a number of small and what we would deem to be insignificant entities that we don't really do any test work over because of their relative size. And the circular graph on the left is there to represent really the scope and coverage of what our audit consists of. So you'll see the dark blue would represent the individually significant components, or sorry, the royal blue, I guess it would be. The darker blue would represent the in scope, not significant amounts that or entities that we look at, and then the balance is the other things. So we cover the vast majority of all the financial transactions. The next slide deals with materiality. Consistent with prior years, we've used a materiality that's based off of the percentage of expenditures. We believe this is the most appropriate, and in looking at all of the municipal audits that we do across Canada, this is consistent with our approach for determining materiality. We've established a factor of 1.4% of total expenditures to come up with our materiality of 14.5 million. We've estimated what those expenditures will be for March 31st, 2022, based on budgets as well as results to date. in discussions with management, and we believe them to be just slightly above $1 billion for the year. We've also included, just for the committee's reference, the fact that we do look at other metrics to ensure that the level of materiality we've established is not too high that we would cause us concern in some of the areas of our audit. So by way of example, as a percentage of total assets, we've used our materiality would be about 0.5%, which is within our relevant range for establishing materiality if we were to use total assets. The other metric that we look at would be the accumulated surplus. And again, it's about 0.6% of the accumulated surplus that exists within the consolidated financial statements. And again, this would be in the relevant range of what we'd expect had we used the accumulated surplus as our benchmark or basis for determining materiality. The next slide on page, I guess it's page 5, just outlines the fact that we do have some professional obligations with respect to fraud. And included here would be the discussion with respect to the risk of material misstatement due to fraud resulting from fraudulent revenue recognition. This is generally a concept that applies to for-profit entities, not for municipalities or not-for-profit entities. We have not identified any risks that would suggest that this is a fraud risk that would be applicable to the Halifax Regional Municipality, and therefore we've rebutted this risk, which is permitted under our standards. However, if we go to the next slide, we are required to consider the risk of material misstatement due to fraud from management override of controls. So this is the fact that management is in a position that they could override certain controls within the entity to commit fraud or fraudulent financial reporting. We are required to address this risk within our professional standards, and we do take an approach to ensure that we are identifying what those fraud risks could be, how those fraud risks could be manipulated, and perform procedures generally over areas such as journal entries where results could be amended, or looking at how estimates have been developed and if there are biases in those estimates that may result in an answer that is more desirable than another. On page 10 slide 10 and 11, page 7 and 8, we do go over the areas of focus. As I mentioned, these areas have not changed from the prior year. They consist of the more material and large balances that exist within the financial statements, both on the statement of operations as well as on the statement of financial position. We typically are looking to use either a substantive analytic procedure to develop an expectation and compare to actual results to ensure there is no material misstatements, or we're looking at test of details either through confirmation with a third party or through looking at underlying contracts and support for transactions that have been recorded to ensure that they've been appropriately recorded in consideration of the public sector accounting standards. If I slip ahead to page 10, one more page, please. We've outlined our proposed milestones and how we tackle the work. We've gone through a process of planning, which is identifying the key risks and presenting them here to this committee. We will do interim field work, which is where we update our understanding of the processes and controls that exist within the HRM over the key areas of focus. We also look to begin our process of doing substantive testing in areas where of lower risk, where it's predictable and the amounts are understandable. A key area here would be tax revenues, where those bills have been established and have gone out, and there's a systematic process of how that revenue gets recognized through to the end of March. In June and into July, we'll complete our final field work to report back to this committee in July and expect that the financial statements will be approved at a council meeting either late July, early August, depending on what works with council and timing. So we anticipate being fully prepared to report to this committee and at the council date with no outstanding items based on our current work plan as well as prior history in working with the HRM. The next slide, slide 14, outlines our fees. You'll note our fees are consistent with what we have quoted under our proposal. In the prior year, there was a small fee charge for the fact that there was a new auditing standard that we needed to adopt. So there was some time and effort that resulted in additional work that was not originally contemplated in the scope of work as a result of the change in auditing standards. That will not reoccur in the current year, and so we've budgeted nothing for that. The rest of the presentation provides some appendices that talk to really what's required of auditors to communicate to the audit committee as well as those charged with governance, as well as just some information in Appendix 2 for the committee should they wish to review any audit or assurance insights that we've published over the last little while to as a way to keep up to speed on what's going on in our profession. And I'd like to open it up to questions on our presentation.
Thank you. So if you would like the presentation to come down to the clerk's office, can we please have that? Thank you. And first of all, Carrie, happy birthday to someone there. It looks like you've got the balloons and stuff behind you.
Very astute. That's yeah, my son's tomorrow.
Ah, good stuff. Good stuff. Okay. Thank you. And I would ask members of committee if you have a question or comment for Clary or the team or staff, please indicate that by entering it in the chat, and we will just move around as people have questions. I'd like to start off. Why is the Centennial pool not significant? You have a number of items listed in the group audit scope as in scope and not significant and untested, and the Centennial pool is listed as one of those that is not significant and untested. I'm wondering, with the attention that's been drawn on that as far as repairs and remediation and I'm not sure what.
Well, it comes to the Mr. Chairman, it comes to the question as to from a public sector accounting standards perspective, what is significant. So when we look at those operations, Centennial pool, I believe the Centennial pool, the asset itself is included in the tangible capital assets of the HRM. In the Centennial pool, the committee that operates the pool, they would just be dealing with the operation. So any obligations, liabilities, et cetera, that may exist with respect to the actual physical facility would actually be in scope because that's included in the assets that are managed by the HRM. The actual operations of the pool, which is the regular membership, the renting of the pool, the payment of salaries to staff, et cetera, would be financially insignificant. And that's the part of the component that would be at a scope and not financially significant.
Okay, thank you. And I'm looking to the committee for any further questions of clarification, and I don't see any.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have my hand up.
Oh, I didn't see that. Okay, yep, go ahead, Councillor Hensby.
I was just curious about the Halifax Regional Water Commission relationship there. I thought they had their own auditors and stuff. Just like to know how their audit versus our audit and that relationship between the two. Can you just clarify that a bit better, please?
Certainly. You are correct, Councillor Hensby. They have their own auditors. Part of the auditing standards, which is Canadian Auditing Standard 600, which deals with group audits, is that we are required to get audit evidence over that significant component. And in doing so, one of the levers that exist within the auditing standards is to rely on, or sorry, I shouldn't say rely, that's the bad word these days. It's to use their auditors as a component of our audit. So we would provide them with direct instructions and expectations as to what we believe to be significant risks, as well as levels of materiality to ensure that they are completing their work in with enough granularity that it would fit within our own confines of materiality. So we basically provide them a direction document. They would report back to us their findings based on those directions we gave them, and we would also review key areas of their audit work papers to ensure that we are comfortable that the results they've reported back to us are appropriate. And then that information is consolidated in with the results of the Halifax Regional Municipality through what they call modified equity accounting. And so we want to make sure that we've done enough work to be comfortable that the adjustments being made based on the audited financial statements of the Halifax Regional Water Commission are free from material error, because ultimately KPMG signs off that the adjustments made in the HRM books are appropriate, and we get that audit evidence through a relationship, in this case with Grant Thornton, in providing them instruction and direction. And they would issue their own audit opinion on the financial statements of the Halifax Regional Water Commission. That would be their requirement and their standards. Go ahead.
So at any point, do other auditors for the Water Commission or for us as a municipality look at any of the, or do any reviews of the shared infrastructure projects that are on from time to time? We have water, sewer, and pavement projects that are kind of correlated stuff. I'd like to know how those audit of those type of infrastructure capital projects are done.
Our mandate is to audit the financial statements. So to the extent there are infrastructure projects that have generated the need to either have an expenditure or a capital asset recognized, we review those as part of our regular audit work. To the extent it is the HRM's cost, to the extent it is the Halifax Regional Water Commission's cost, Grant Thornton would be auditing that component on our behalf, as well as for the purpose of their own standalone financial statements, to ensure that they are free from material misstatement as they relate to the consolidated financial statements.
Okay, thank you very much. Carolyn, go ahead.
Yes, hi. I would have a couple questions if that's allowed. Are you aware, Carrie, of any major investments on systems that were done, for example, payroll or revenue management or expenses that would impact your audit? And my other question is there any audits from the Auditor General that would also impact or influence your audit that happened throughout the year?
Right. So with respect to your first question, we routinely review IT. There have been some investments in IT with respect to human resources, but they haven't yet transformed the payroll side of things. So we typically focus on the payroll side. There would be some desire at some point for them to be more integrated, and I believe that's coming with the depending on what the outcome is with respect to what the new financial reporting system would be, which is currently an older version of SAP, so it may be an upgrade, but that hasn't occurred yet. I think that's on slate for next fiscal, if I'm not mistaken, or last I had checked. So we become aware of that. And as I said, we do look at the other key systems. I know the revenue, in this case, the certain of the revenue systems have been rather old. However, our approach traditionally to those particular areas of our audit have been heavily focused on substantive audit evidence. So the systems haven't, in the IT infrastructure really hasn't impacted our audit approach there or the extent of our audit evidence. So we, other than to get a cursory understanding of how the changes have occurred and if there are any new risks with respect to the process as a result of a change in IT, we don't go too deep, and we have not identified any of those key risks that we need to address this year. With respect to your second question, we do review the Auditor General's reports and consider them. We haven't identified anything specific from their findings that we believe would have a significant or impact on our audit. A few years back, and I want to say maybe 4 years now, there were some significant findings within the procurement process that we addressed within our audit. So it's not unheard of or not to be unexpected that there may be information that we get from those reports that impact the extent and nature of our audit evidence that we do. But we continually monitor them and see where there is a potential for a in particular control risk, an increasing in a control risk because it's not functioning as intended or not properly designed, or where there may be significant risk that there's a material misstatement from a dollar value perspective because of the systemic nature of some of these things. But we haven't, again, in our review to date, we haven't identified anything that we felt we should bring forward to this committee, or else it would be in our report.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Just to add some clarity, it's Dave Harley, Director of Accounting and Financial Reporting. In terms of the system updates, Carrie's right. We have a number of system upgrades that are currently ongoing, but not yet live. So it'll be within the next year, we're upgrading our TRM system for our revenue management, and we'll be working with KPMG in the coming year to make sure we're covering off their audit needs for that once it's live.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Carrie and Dave. Let's go to Councillor Purdy, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Carrie, for the presentation. So the audits, I can't even imagine doing an audit on something as big as HRM. And you had mentioned some key risks several times in the presentation, also even in answering some of the questions. So I was wondering, in an audit of this size, what are some of the key risks that you would be looking for? And also, just perked my interest that it's been the same company doing the audit each year. And is that normal for a municipality this size to have the same auditor, I guess, checking in from year to year? And if it's not, is it because like there's probably very few professionals that could do an audit of this size that could explain that? So wondering for a little clarification.
Sure. So the area of the key audit risk, they would be traditionally focused on what it is we're trying to validate. So we would, when we get in to do our audits, we break them down into smaller pieces. As you say, it is a big entity, the Halifax Regional Municipality. So we need to consider them. So key risks are generally focused on whether we have, or what potentially impacts meeting the requirements under the professional standards. So one area, by way of example, would be the completeness and accuracy of tax revenues. And how do we address those risks that impact it, which could be data error, by way of example. So if there's an error in the underlying system that generated a incorrect tax bill that then got booked as revenue and is material, and it goes unnoticed, then we need to identify and design procedures that would identify that. Similar, payroll. Look at payroll, what's the risk that somebody's getting paid the wrong amount? And then to further consider that in the context of the larger entity, what's the risk that there's enough people getting paid the wrong amount that it's material to the financial statements? So an audit is not intended to be 100% accurate. It certainly is intended, though, to consider where the risks are that there could be material misstatements in the financial statements, which could be another good example is there is standards that define how management is to record an obligation for the remediation of waste management sites. And in those particular estimates, there are costs that are projected, as well as interest rates that are used to discount those costs. And those are areas where, again, we would quantify or try to quantify and establish what's the risk that there's a bias. Management has one particular outcome they may want, and as a result, inflate or deflate costs, or change the discount rate to meet what they need. And so we define those risks at a granular level within the key areas of our file where we believe there could be a possible misstatement, and design procedures to address those. With respect to auditors and their involvement, management can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the policy of the HRM is to go out to proposal every 5 years to establish an audit relationship. So we have been in place now. I believe this is our 5th year of the current mandate. There is nothing within the professional standards or within any sort of guidance out there in Canada that states that you can't appoint the same auditor year after year. In many cases, for certain entities, audit relationships have lasted, 40, 50 years, depending on management and the shareholders or the stakeholders' desires. What I will say, one of the things that has come up and is a legitimate concern, I think, as a profession and as a committee, is familiarity risk with respect to auditors, and that is something that all firms have tried to address through their own internal policy. So one of the examples here is I have been the audit partner on the HRM for, this will be my 10th year. And as a result, under our current policies, this would be my last year as audit partner because I would be considered to be too familiar with the audit after 10 years. So we would establish who a new partner would be in any future years and move forward on that to combat or rebut or provide a process through which a new set of eyes looks at the audit, ensures that I haven't become too familiar and haven't overlooked certain key risks that exist.
Thank you. Thanks for that. I found that very informative. That was helpful.
Yeah, Jerry Blackwood here, CFO, and thanks for that, Carrie. And yeah, just if I could add, I mean, Carrie spoke to the audit standards and professional standards, and just for the committee, our RFPs for our audit services would go through a competitive procurement process and subject to all the public procurement rules as well. So thank you.
So Carrie, if I can just follow on what your last comment was about the familiarity risk. You talked about you being the lead auditor. Could you talk about the rest of your teams and the same risk, please?
Sure. Well, I smile because one of the, I won't say one of the challenges, but one of the natures of an auditing firm is we generally train more people than we need, and over the years they go out into industry or to other practices and develop their skills. So last year's audit manager was Greg. And he has moved on from KPMG. So Rebecca is the new audit manager who has not been overly involved with the HRM in the past and brings a new lens to the audit team. So this is her first year. We also had a audit senior who was with us for, I think, almost 3 years in performing the audit, and she has moved on to a new profession and career. And we would be bringing in as the audit senior this year someone who has worked last year as the sort of second in charge with respect to the audit. So we have some continuity there in terms of understanding management and their processes, which we think is important, but also gives them sort of the ability to see some of the different areas of our audit work and again, bring that sort of fresh lens and not be overly familiar so they can question what we do. Internally as an audit team, we sort of have a chain of command, as you might expect, but we also have a chain of communication that should should we have internal discussions or conflicts over approaches or what we're doing, including things like whether they believe we've complied with the professional requirements or not. There is a process to elevate those concerns internally, including a anonymous tip line that we take very serious, and it's all outlined in our audit quality report that I alluded to at the beginning of our presentation. So we think, we design policies, procedures to ensure that we are addressing these risks and concerns, because we believe that audit quality is the underpinning theme that needs to be transcended throughout our audits, and there's no excuse for not doing quality audits and ensuring that we have the trust of the public, and in this case, the stakeholders of the HRM, which would include the citizens that live here.
Okay. Thank you very much, Carrie. Councillor Morse.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm just curious about the international events going on now, and we're in kind of uncharted waters in terms of energy prices and inflation. And if you take those kinds of things into account and what impact they might have on the audit going forward.
Yeah, literally just had an alert come through yesterday that we published internally about what that might mean in the context of for-profit entities and the audit of them. One of the considerations for sure is things such as impairment. In the for-profit world anyway, would be things such as impairment or entities' abilities to continue as going concern, or another key area might be whether you have some redundant assets that now can't be used, or need discontinued operation, I guess would be the term they might use. Under public sector accounting standards, those concepts really are not regularly discussed because of the nature of the entity. So, you exist to provide services to the people of the HRM, including, develop assets. They aren't necessarily there to generate revenues, because your revenues are primarily through a property tax rate base, not necessarily through user fees and things of that nature that traditionally for-profit entities would be looking to recover the costs of assets through. And also there's the ability generally, because of the nature of your entity, to generate revenues through property taxes, that going concern is not typically something that's considered under public sector accounting standards. So that takes away a few of the risks that we've seen anyway out there with respect to entities and how the events in Ukraine are impacting us. Again, we focus on historical financial information typically, so we're looking at what has been spent, not what's going to be spent, and in doing that, it really doesn't impact us too much. However, I would say that there certainly is a lot of concern out there, and I'm sure you, as a broader council, have had concerns about the effects of inflation on, rate base and the ability to deliver what you want to deliver from a city perspective. But from an audit perspective, we have to be cognizant of what those risks are, but we certainly have to keep in mind that we're doing this under the concept of a public sector accounting standards and not in a for-profit world. So there are a lot of those risks seem to go away and are more operational in nature than accounting in nature.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Morse. Let's go to Councillor Daigle Gammon, and then Claude has entered a question in the chat, which I'll read onto the record or Claude can, but let's go to Councillor Daigle-Gammon first.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Carrie. My question actually builds a little bit on Councillor Hensby's questions around the relationship with Halifax Water. In terms of the audit plan, where Halifax Water, you provide questions to them specific to the audit, and their audit team is Grant Thornton. Is there any, and this question might actually be for Jerry, I'm not sure, but is there any requirements that they actually be two different firms? So, for example, if we go out to tender again, a request for proposal, is there a consideration that Halifax Water's audit firm is different than that of HRM's? Would there be any worry around a conflict of interest, for example, if it was the same firm?
I would just say that I'm not aware of any issue unless there's an internal issue within the Halifax Regional Municipality or something of that nature. But there's nothing professionally that would or negate us from being the same firm.
Okay. Jerry?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor, through you to the chair. Yeah, I would agree with Carrie. There's nothing from professional standards that would prohibit that, or from a procurement standard. And Halifax Water, they operate at arm's length, so their operations are pretty separate from ours, so I don't see any issues there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Daigle-Gammon. Claude, would you like to go ahead, or I can read your question?
Sure. No, I'll lay it out. I'm just wondering, Carrie, maybe you could just let the committee know how your firm's views on key risks as it relates to the financial statements and key controls as it relates to the areas where you're doing testing and evaluating and so forth. How your views for the HRM engagement, how consistent are those views with HRM management's broader and more comprehensive views on key risks and controls? And then how do you ensure that there are not any significant gaps or differences between your firm's views in those regards and those of management?
Yeah, I'll maybe answer the question, Claude, backwards. So I'll start with sort of the gaps. What we typically find, and this wouldn't be inconsistent with the Halifax Regional Municipality, is that management is more concerned at a much more granular level than we would be, because their level of materiality, or their concern for whether there are financial errors or misstatements or improprieties, is generally quite lower of a threshold than ours. And the reason for that, obviously, is because they're concerned with an operating budget in real dollars, and needing to ensure that they are efficient in the use of their funds. So they're generally looking at a much lower dollar thresholds when it comes to their own internal controls. There is I'll say a line that we typically try to establish between what are operational controls and what are or risk mitigation controls, and what are financial reporting controls. And a good example, I think, of that would be as it relates to procurement. There'd be a number of policies and procedures in place to ensure that there is a fair and transparent procurement process in place. And there would be various levels of dollar thresholds in terms of approvals and the process under which it needs to be undertaken to enter into contracts and award contracts. Typically, we're not too worried about that. That might get back to the question. We generally look at what, if anything's been done from the Auditor General. Has there been any, look at whether or not there's been anything reported within either the media or within internal sort of hotlines with respect to potential improprieties in that space. But that generally does not, other than from a fraud perspective, generally does not impact whether or not an expenditure on the actual awarded contract is properly recorded, the dollar value is correct, etc. So we're more focused on that component of it. We do review, as I mentioned, the Auditor General's reports. They often give us a good insight into what concerns may exist within management. We review the minutes of the Audit and Finance Committee. We review minutes of board meetings that take place, or sorry, council meetings, wrong term, to ensure that we understand the considerations, concerns of the council as a whole, as well as the financial considerations. So we're constantly sort of, I'll say, absorbing from a historical perspective where there have been concerns and what those concerns are, and then we'll try and reconcile them back to our own risks that we've identified in our financial statement audit to ensure that, one, we haven't overlooked a potential key area or an area of sensitivity that may be, although not financially significant, may be significant more from a qualitative point of view, which would require us to potentially do more audit work. And ensure that, you know, we've kept our audit plan up to date. So when we talk about the audit plan, and I know we provided a nice little circle showing sort of the progression of the audit, what's really not portrayed there is the fact that there is a constant reevaluation of risk that inherently exists within our audit process. So as we get new information, we go back and revisit whether or not we need to update our risk mandate in the financial reporting risk that we've included, and do more audit work, or confirm that, you know, the amount of work that we've done and the areas of risk that we've identified are accurate and complete. And I hope that answers it, Claude.
Well, maybe I just tag on to that question is, in your view, I guess, again, from the auditor's perspective, is it important for the Finance and Audit Committee to have an appropriately comprehensive understanding of the risks and controls that affect, one, the audit, but also beyond that, relate to the financial systems and processes and reporting for the entity? And where I'm going with this is the Finance and Audit Committee of HRM getting what it needs on risks and controls, so that there is I guess a syllabus of, here are the key risks and controls related to the HRM from the auditor's perspective and from the management's perspective, that they as a committee have a responsibility to oversee.
Right. No, that is a consideration that we have in the audit. It would be, we do evaluate to what we call entity level controls, and there would be various frameworks out there that exist with respect to what is good practice with respect to those types of controls. COSO being the most popular and generally most quoted one that exists, where it outlines what are the control objectives that have been set by the entity, how are they assessing risk. And I think, Claude, what you're commenting on is really, we do evaluate how the entity manages financial reporting risk within the scope of our audit. And based on those general entity level controls, that does provide us with a framework as to whether or not we need to consider there to be higher risk or lower risk because of the oversight. And in our evaluation to date, from a planning perspective, we have generally found them to be sufficient for the purposes of our audit to go with a lower level of risk. So we haven't identified any areas where there is such a pervasive gap in those controls that we need to consider doing more work, or, you know, heaven forbid you get into an instance where there might even be a scope limitations on your ability to do your work. because the oversight just doesn't exist. However, I believe what is outside the scope of our audit, and what is probably more relevant, is whether or not the Audit and Finance Committee has an appropriate process in place to, one, establish a risk registry as to what are the key risks that they're looking to evaluate, and really hold the managements to account to identify the controls that exist that mitigate those risks, which would be consistent with, I think, a governance model that generally exists in most entities where they have adopted sort of this concept of a risk registry, and look to, one, management to provide information to give them the knowledge to conclude that there is an effective control environment based on what's considered to be important to the Finance and Audit Committee, and two, a framework through which the Auditor General can also report back, because they would look more at the operational sides of those risks as opposed to the historical financial side too.
Yeah, and I mean,
Oh, sorry, Claude, you went on mute there.
sorry, yeah, sorry. There are I guess I'd just turn it back to the chair and say, I mean, there may be something already in place, but the Finance and Audit Committee should consider it. I know they're all very busy with their counselor responsibilities, but is the committee where it should be as it relates to key risks and key controls? And is there something else that they need so that they do in fact have that syllabus or span of items that they need to monitor on a regular basis? Anyway, thanks. It's a good discussion.
Thank you very much for your comments, everybody, and thank you for Claude and Carrie for especially those last comments and questions. I really appreciate that. I'll follow up on that. At this point, we don't have the motion on the floor, so we have been asking questions of the presentation. I'm wondering if someone would be willing to put the motion on the floor.
Before we go to that, I had a question in the chat about our own Auditor Generals. Do our own Auditor Generals make any comment about this process?
Carrie?
We review what their mandate is. I'm not sure that, and I haven't been privy to any conversations with the Auditor General where they have raised any concerns with respect to the risk assessment as well as the controls. And then maybe Jerry or somebody in management has a different view or has been privy to more conversations with them.
Thank you. Go ahead, Jerry.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I don't think with respect to the Auditor General over my career and my involvement with the audit that there's been too many comments made with respect to, the audit findings report or the audit plan. Certainly, I think to Carrie's point, right, like part of their planning is they follow the work plan of the Auditor General. And if there's, any control deficiencies or anything or process around that relate to the, the financial statements, that would be flagged in KPMG's audit and certainly tested, to that extent. But typically, the Auditor General does not get involved with the financial audit. That sort of separate from her role as the Auditor General and her reporting relationship to Council. I'm certainly sure she could if she wanted to make that statement. But I, in my experience, no, I don't think that's something that the AG office gets too involved with. But certainly would be happy to take any advice if there was something that came up. And I mean, again, I would be we as a management team, we obviously follow the AG reports as well, and certainly want to make sure that we are improving process and control around the AG's recommendations, and we would communicate those to Carrie and team when they come in and do their audit. Thank you.
And I would simply add, I think, Councillor Hensby, is that as I look across and see Claude there, that one of the recommendations, whether it was through management, through council, or through the Auditor General, was to include folks outside of council with some experience in auditing and financial reporting as members of the audit committee, which was certainly a welcome improvement, and certainly speaks to that a process is being followed to identify potential areas of improvement within the what we would consider the entity level controls or the risk controls. So that's a good example, I think, of where an improvement has been made within this process.
Okay, thank you, Carrie. I don't see any further questions in the chat. Would someone please put the motion on the floor?
I can do that for you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Cleary.
I'll move that the audit committee approve the attached audit planning report for the year-end audit of HRM's consolidated financial statements, general rate surplus statements, and miscellaneous trust fund statements as prepared by the municipal auditor, KPMG.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder?
I'll second.
Thank you, Councillor Purdy. Are there any comments on the motion? Okay, all in favor? I don't think I need a named roll for the vote. So all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. All opposed, say nay. Great. Thank you very much. The next item is we have an opportunity to go in camera and have a further discussion about things that, well, at this point, the only in-camera item is the minutes from June 26, 2019 and July 21st, 2021. So can we have motion
the minutes of June 26, 2019 and July 21st, 2021, the in-camera minutes?
Second.
Thank you, Councillor Cleary. If there is any discussion on those minutes, we need to go in camera. And I don't see anybody looking to go in camera related to those. So all those in favor of the minutes, please signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. All opposed, say nay. Great, thank you. We have those minutes. The date of the next meeting is to be determined. We haven't worked through when that might be yet. So we will be in touch in plenty of time for when that next meeting would be. And with that, we are at the end of the agenda. So could I have a motion to adjourn, please?
Motion to adjourn the audit committee and go to the audit and finance standing committee.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hensby. The audit committee stands adjourned. Thank you very much, Claude and Carolyn, for your input into this committee. Once again, we really appreciate the input from those of us willing to help out with across HRM.
Thank you.
So it is now 11:01. I would like to call the Audit and Finance Standing Committee meeting to order. And once again, I'd like to acknowledge that the Halifax Regional Municipality is located in the traditional and unceded lands of the Mi'kmaq people. The municipality acknowledges the peace and friendship treaties signed in this territory and recognizes that we're all treaty people. We have done the AV check, so I'm going to dispense with that for this meeting. The approval of the minutes is the next item on the agenda. Can I have someone to move the approval of the minutes of February 17th, 2022, please? Councillor Cleary moved that. Do we have a seconder?
I'll second.
Thank you, Councillor Morse. Any errors or omissions? Not seeing any. All in favor of the minutes of February 2017, February 17th, 2022, please signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. Great, thank you. We have the approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions. Madam Clerk, do we have any changes to the order of business?
Thank you, Chair. There have been no requests for additions or deletions for this meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I have someone put the motion on the floor for that, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Daigle Gammon. Seconded by Councillor Cleary. Any changes from the committee? Not seeing any. All in favor of the order of business as presented, please signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. Great, thank you. We have an agenda. Business arising out of the minutes is none. Call for declaration of conflict of interest. Not seeing any. Motions of reconsideration is none. Motions of rescission is none. Consideration of deferred business is none. And notices of tabled matters is none. We're halfway through the agenda. Correspondence. Over to the clerk. Do we have any?
Thank you, Chair. No correspondence has been received for this meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. And do we have any petitions?
And the clerk's office did not receive notification of any petitions.
Okay, thank you. And I don't see any from the members of committee, and we don't have any presentations at this point. No information items brought forward, no report from the Auditor General. So we're on our first staff report, which is item 12.2.1, the ICIP contribution agreements. There is no presentation on this item. However, we have some members of HRM staff, including John McPherson, welcome back, who are able to speak to this and answer any questions. But first, can I have someone put the motion on the floor, please?
I'd be happy to do that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
I move that the Audit and Finance Standing Committee direct the Chief Administrative Officer to provide a staff report outlining the I'm on the wrong motion here. I move that the Audit and Finance Standing Committee recommend that Halifax Regional Council 1 approve amendments to the capital budget for multi-year funding for capital account CB 1900008 energy efficiency initiatives for HRM community building retrofits as outlined in the financial implications section of this report, and 2, increase capital account CB 1900008 energy efficiency initiatives by $1,539,930 with funding from the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program in 2021/22 with no net impact to the net budget.
Second.
Thank you, Councillor Cleary and Councillor Daigle Gammon. So again, we have members of staff here who are able to answer any questions on that. If you have any questions, please signify that in the chat.
I would like to
Councillor
very
Cleary.
briefly. So I don't have questions per se, although I'll think while I'm speaking. But you know, it's not every day that you get to do these kind of upgrades, putting on solar panels, energy retrofits in major municipal buildings like our fitness facilities, for so many of them, for so little money. You know, these are, I'm trying to do the math in my head, 27 dollars, I think it is. You know, we're spending a couple $1 million and or even less than that. I think it's totally 10 million. We're spending 27% of that. So yeah, a little bit more than that. And the feds in the province are kicking in the rest, and our residents and our environment and our future generations are going to benefit from that. So I think this is fantastic. I guess one question I would have, the report talks about how we had some projects on the list when council passed this, I want to say about 2 years ago. And we ended up having to shuffle some around. With regard to those other projects, will we be getting back to those at some point in time?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, through you to the councillor. I'm Philip DeGanzik, Director of Facility Design and Construction. Yeah, the original list that was you're referencing in the original report to council included some Yonge Street energy systems, which were low temperature heating between a number of facilities in that area, including the Forum, and not exactly sure of the other ones, but potentially even Mayflower or Curling Club. through consultation with the province and based on a study that was funded by the province to explore options for good candidates for facilities where heat recovery from ice plants was viable, we did some shuffling. The original system for the form is now going to be part of a separate application for similar quantities of assistance from the federal and provincial governments to upgrade the HVAC systems for that complex. But it gave us the opportunity to add photovoltaic solar systems to 2 of the other facilities where we were looking at as part of this work.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Councillor Cleary. Go ahead, Councillor Morse.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mine was sort of a similar question. I was wondering if there were projects that were turned down and why. And also, wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about the plan for Alderney Gate. I think it was an experimental geothermal project that had some problems, and I'm just wondering how it will be corrected. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. Yes, Alderney Gate. That system that was implemented there, unfortunately, never really worked as it was hoped. Recently, it's been plagued by a number of operational issues, as well as very increasing maintenance costs. So the work that's proposed there will use some of the existing subsurface piping systems that were part of that system, but then update all of the controls and air handling units and HVAC equipment associated with that HVAC system, and make it a lot more efficient and a lot more reliable and cheaper to operate. In addition, photovoltaic solar system is planned for that facility and complex as well.
Okay. Thank you. So there's not going to be any involvement of seawater or anything like that. We're not going to be trying that again. No. Okay.
No.
All right. And can you say anything about whether we submitted projects that were turned down for the funding?
I don't have the background on that. The assessment and the study was done and funded by the province, and then there was subsequent discussions to identify the best facilities where we can get the biggest bang for the buck, and that's this list.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor Morse. I don't see anybody else who has asked any other questions. So are we ready for the question on the motion? Seems like we are. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say nay. Great. Thank you very much, everybody. And thank you, Philip and John. The next item on the agenda is item 12.2.2, the amendment of partial tax exemption administrative order AO10. For this, we do have a presentation. And so, Andre. And we can see the presentation now. We can't see you. And we can't hear you. Andre, you seem to be muted.
I am now unmuted.
Beautiful. We can hear you now. Go ahead. And I can't
you.
wait till we get back in person.
Me too. Thank you, Councillor Russell. Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to present today the partial tax exemption administrative order and tax deferral bylaw amendments. These allow, I will explain how these facilitate the increases to tax relief that were described in the fiscal framework by finance staff and the CEO in late November and late January. So before we get to the details of the amendments to these two pieces of amendments to the bylaw administrative order, let me talk about the program, a little bit of history on the program. Next slide, please. So the property tax rebate was in place in various municipalities prior to amalgamation. And in 2006, the program was significantly redesigned. I know that because I was actually there with PJ Temple as part of that group that redesigned the program back in 2006. So there were two key things that changed at that point. And one of the things we did was increase the rebate level. It was about $400 per household, and we increased it to about $600. The other thing that we did was to integrate the rebate and deferral programs. Up until that point, people could apply for a rebate to their tax bills or a deferral, which made a very difficult decision for some. You could imagine if your tax bill were $1,200 and you could get a $600 rebate, or you could defer the entire $1,200, and you would have to make a tough decision about, if you had a hard time paying that $600, which to choose. So now both programs are available to all eligible homeowners. So they can take the $600 rebate and defer the remaining amount. So what this essentially does is allows low-income homeowners to avoid any risk of tax sale. The other thing that's unique about the program in HRM that you won't see in many other jurisdictions is that it applies to low-income households where the homeowner is of any age. Most programs across the country target seniors, but this program, recognizes that there can be working families that are below the income threshold as well. So this program is inclusive to all ages. Now, getting to the changes that we're looking at today, the rebate and deferral programs were indexed in 2008. That means that the thresholds for both the eligibility and for the maximum rebate were indexed to various metrics. The maximum rebate, like I said, that was initially set in 2006 at $600, was linked to average home taxes. So as the average tax on homes in HRM increased, the maximum rebate also increases. You'll see that it's much higher than $600 now. The income eligibility is also linked to Statistics Canada information, their annual information on low income cutoffs. So that's updated every year. And again, in 2006, the income threshold was about 26,000. Now it's 35,000. Now you may ask if these two programs were integrated and essentially they serve the same clientele, why we have two different pieces that guide our decisions on these, why we have an administrative order for one and a bylaw for the other. And that's because the authority to do these two things, to forgive a portion of the taxes and to allow people to defer a balance of taxes, is under two different pieces of legislation. One can be approved by policy and the other requires a bylaw. So they have remained as two distinct pieces of guidance for us since then. Now let's talk about the proposal that was made at the fiscal framework in November and January. One of the objectives that was stated was to increase the income eligibility so it would meet the living wage in Halifax. Now, the living wage is a fairly recent concept that has been adopted in many jurisdictions in looking at equity. So The living wage in Halifax, according to the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, is just over $40,000. Now with the current AO, like I said, the eligibility threshold this year is $35,000. With the indexing, that would increase to $36,000. And that, again, is due to the low income cutoff measures from Stats Canada. They increased this year. So what we're proposing, that $36,000 is based on a 3-person household. The low income cutoff varies by household size. And so it was set in 2008 as a 3-person household. If we increase that to a 4-person household, a different metric on the Stats Canada chart, then we can increase the income eligibility threshold to $43,000 for next year. So that is what is proposed, that we make an amendment to the indexing in the AO such that it would reflect the low income cutoff for a 4-person household. That increases significantly the number of eligible households. It's expected that there would be a 40% increase in the number of homeowners that would qualify for the program with this change. Next slide, please. Now, the maximum tax rebate, like I said, is linked to the average home price. So it has increased, as I mentioned earlier, from $600 to over $1,000 now. And this would continue to increase over time. But what we're looking at is how do we help those that are already in the program by increasing the income eligibility from $36,000 to $43,000. That will allow more people to enter the program, but it won't necessarily help those that are already in it. By increasing the maximum tax rebate by $150 from $1,050 to $1,200, it'll increase the amount that everyone in the program receives. So it increases the benefit, reduces the taxes for those that are already in the program. There are about 1,500 people in the program now. So this will benefit those people significantly. Next slide, please. So in summary, the proposal is to increase the income eligibility from $36,000 to $43,000 and to increase the maximum rebate from $1,050 to $1,200. This will require the program budget to increase to $1.7 million. We have slightly more than that in the budget that was presented to council the other day with a little contingency built in. This chart, I won't go through it in detail, but it shows that of the different income ranges, what we anticipate to be the increase in benefit to various groups. And you can see it varies quite a bit, but most will receive, $100 or more in benefit with the new program than they would have otherwise. And in fact, those that are already in the program would see, on average, a $245 increase to their benefit. And new participants that wouldn't have been in the program at all, their average rebate would be $323. Next slide. Oh, just one more thing on this. You can see that the average program rebate, increase is about $92. And that's roughly what we're projecting the average tax to increase for the average home. Now, keep in mind that those in the program, their home values are about 2/3 of the values of the homes for the general population. So this would more than cover increase in taxes for those in the program this year. Next slide, please. So because we already have the indexing in the admin order and the bylaw, we can make this adjustment we can make these changes to improve the low income relief with 3 edits of the administrative order and one edit of the bylaw. And you'll see those in the report that was provided to you today. By keeping these changes linked into the indexing in the administrative order and bylaw, the indexing will continue in future years. So just as we've seen the maximum rebate increase from $600 to over $1,000 since 2006, we can see that $1,200 will increase in future years to reflect the cost of living. So we simply reset the values slightly higher, but they'll continue to index both the eligibility threshold and the maximum rebate level. Next slide, please. So the recommendation is to adopt those changes to the administrative order and bylaw as described in the attachments to your report today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andre, for that presentation. Appreciate that. Go ahead, Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Andre. I would make the motion that the Audit and Finance Standing Committee recommend that Halifax Regional Council 1 adopt the amendments to Administrative Order 10, the partial tax exemption administrative order as set out in attachment 2 to this report, and 2, adopt bylaw T706, amending bylaw T700, the tax deferral bylaw as set out in attachment 4 to this report.
Second. Purdy.
Thank you, Councillor Purdy, for seconding that. Go ahead, Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Thank you, Councillor Purdy. I actually got good news. I mean, I can't think that there's anything bad in this, Andre. How often do we get to see something like this that's actually going to benefit persons of a lower income to be able to not only make the program open it up to more people, but also I think in one part where you would say, like, what does it do for people who are currently in the program now? What is their benefit? And I guess their benefit is the future indexing, right? That they continue to share in that going forward. So I think that's awesome. The increase, I think at one point I heard you say that implementing this program would actually cover the cost of any tax rate increase that they may incur in the budget year. Is that based on that rate increase being 4.9%?
It would more than cover the 4.6% that's currently proposed.
4.6.
So it would more than cover that. So there's about it would cover it plus about 50% more than that.
Great, thank you. And you know, as I said, this is great. What's the downside?
Well, it's very hard to find one, actually. There's a very modest cost to the municipality to increase the budget. We've increased the budget by $400,000. That's a very modest price to pay to bring 600 new homeowners potentially into the program and to give greater assistance to the 1,600 that are already in it.
Right. Well, if any year to do something like this positive, this is it. Thank you very much, Andre.
You're welcome.
Okay. Thank you very much, Andre. Thank you, Councillor Daigle-Gammon. I don't see, go ahead, Councillor Hensby.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. If I hate to interrupt, Councillor Hensby. I just saw that Bruce had his hand up.
Okay.
We will, if you don't mind. Go ahead, Bruce.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut Councillor Hensby off. I was just going to add a little bit extra there to the slides. One of the things that we've kind of batted about and talked about was whether we can go a little bit further on the low income rebate and tie it into the federal GST or child tax benefit. And what that would do for us is it'd make it administratively a little bit simpler for us, but it also means we'd have the potential to give a little bit more money in situations where there was a disabled individual or potentially a single parent. So if you think of a situation where, you know, somebody's got 6 kids versus somebody who has 2 kids, you know, we'd hypothetically could manage to give more money to the individual with the larger family, because that tends to be a little bit more equitable. I was not thinking about Councillor Purdy when I referred to 6 kids. It's just a coincidence. that was not a specific example. However, we are trying to think about disabled individuals and just make the system a little bit more progressive.
Thank you. Andre, you have popped up as well.
That's
okay.
fine. Bruce has covered it.
Okay, super. Thank you very much. Thank you, Bruce. Councillor Hensby, sorry about that. Go ahead.
No trouble at all. I'm very happy to see this initiative move forward, especially increasing the level of the income level. I'm just kind of wondering, that income level, is that equivalent to any, like you mentioned earlier about the federal programs of the GST and or HST and other things like that? Is this similar to our provincial income levels for social assistance programs? I'd like to know what their threshold is for some of their programs for the rebate programs they have.
The provincial tax rebate program aligns with the guaranteed income supplement, so it's not directly related to to the same index we use, the low income cutoff, but it would range again depending on the situation from as low as 19,000 up to 40 some. So it's certainly generally a lower range than what we use.
And if this passes through committee today, we'll get on to the council agenda pretty quick. When will this program be implemented? Would it be for this fiscal year? And if this is the case, are there any application deadlines, or are our applications open all year round?
Currently, applications are open until December 31st, and information is generally sent out in June, in preparation for the final tax bill.
So if this passes today and gets through committee, through council, regional council as a whole, it will be implemented for this fiscal year, not so for it's based on.
It'll be effective for April 1st, 2022 April for this coming fiscal year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hensby. Go ahead, Councillor Morse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just looking for a bit of information about who the recipients are. What do we know about their ages, just the demographics there, if you could. I kind of had the impression this would be seniors, but it sounds like it could also be families. So I'm also looking to understand a little bit more about if we wanted to do more related to the option that Bruce just mentioned, how would we get that in front of council? Thank you.
We currently don't have like demographic information in terms of household size or age. And we don't ask for that. We only ask for income. So.
Okay, well, that would be challenging to match a program to a group when we're not sure who the group is, I would think.
Yes, we would have to develop a new source of information for that new program. So that's not in place yet, but that would be something we'd be looking into. Can we get that information?
So if I can just expand on that, the way that we would try to do that is the federal government runs the GST and the child care credit programs, and they collect that information. So they collect the income information plus the family size information. I believe they collect whether you're disabled, equivalent to married, which would include single parents. So we would piggyback off of their information, and which would reduce our administration. I guess our challenges would be, first of all, legally, can we do this under the charter? We think we might be able to do it without a change. And second of all, we need to understand how much it's actually going to cost, what the rates would be. So it is a much bigger change for us, which is why we're not going to it in 2022. We just didn't have the time to sit down and do the research and figure it out, well, how exactly is this going to work? What's it going to cost? How can we administer it? We need an information sharing agreement with CRA to be able to proceed. We think we can probably do that, but the devil's in the details. You have to do all the negotiations and get it all tied up. So it's a bigger change, but it's one that we kind of highlighted internally that we think would be well worth looking at.
Okay, could that be included as part of the options going to council for consideration for next year? Because it does sound like it would require a lot of lead time and extra work to develop. But I think it would give us would make sure that we were covering the most needy families, I think.
Yeah, it would. I think hypothetically it could be ready for next year. We just depends on how many other issues council puts forward as a priority and just what kind of roadblocks frankly, what kind of roadblocks we get into. I'm not sure what the status of the information sharing agreements with CRA are. And there's restrictions under the Income Tax Act under sharing information. So we think we can work our ways around that. So there's a lot of nitty gritty stuff that we got to work through.
Okay, but could this be written up in the report that's going to council as something for consideration?
Which specific report you mean for
sorry. As part of this tax program, could there be an additional piece related to what we're talking about here that could be added as a consideration for approval of council, so that we don't lose track of this and we don't miss the opportunity to alter the plan for next year?
Okay, so I understand your point. We don't have a proposal to bring forward that you could vote on per se, which makes it a bit tricky. I guess if you want to hold our feet to the fire and make sure we don't forget about it, then the best thing to do is to bring a motion forward, either here or at council, asking for a report by, I don't know whether it be December or January of 2023, asking for a status update, for example. Like that would probably be, I think, I won't be here, but I think we'd probably commit to coming back and giving the status. But if you want to do that formally through a vote, that's always a great way to track things.
Yeah, the current report will say we'll be looking into it, but yeah, beyond that, if as Bruce says, we could make a commitment to see how viable this is and see what the roadblocks might be ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to hear what my fellow councillors say on this, but I feel it's really important to try to, get the best possible match between our policy and our program and the people we're trying to serve.
Yeah, if I could just add, and thanks Bruce. It's nice to see he's leaving and trying to pile some more work on us there. So just going to give him the hook there. No, I think that's a good point Bruce makes, and just to manage expectations, I don't think we're in a position that we would be able to implement that for this fiscal year, but certainly a motion for us to check back in with council next year. I don't know if probably mostly appropriate to do that during budget season, that we then we would have the time to look into the viability of that program in terms of the information available, and be able to do a bit of planning to inform that report. But that I'm fine with that approach, and gives us direction for next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jerry. Councillor Morse, does that take care of your concerns? Okay,
it does. Thank you.
Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councillor Morse. I was actually thinking the same thing. Bruce, I know that you don't have a whole bunch to do between now and when you leave. So really, you could just send me along the draft of what that motion should look like. And that can be, the marching orders for Jerry and the team going forward when you leave. Thank you, Bruce. You're so great. Answering all of my emails.
Jerry's going to kill me now. So yeah, no, it's simple for us to do a motion and get you the motion if you want to bring it forward. Just for a status update, I think.
Yeah. Thank you, Bruce. Appreciate it. And we all know that for this year, it probably wouldn't, not conceivable this year, but it's wonderful to look forward to something like this to come for next year.
Yep.
The follow-up one. Thank you.
Yeah, and we'd want to sort of look at it globally in terms of our other affordable low-income programs as well, right? Just if there's any, to keep all our programs as consistent as possible, there might be some improvements in other areas as well. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. And Bruce, I look forward to that 6-page motion when we get to it. I don't see any further speakers in the chat. So are we ready for the question?
Question has
been called. All in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say nay. Great. Thank you very much. That motion passes. Thank you very much, Bruce and Andre. Moving forward, we have nothing from the Grants Committee. This is going to sound interesting, but nothing from committee members. So we are on to motions from one of the committee members. Go ahead, Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll move that the Audit and Finance Standing Committee direct the Chief Administrative Officer to provide a staff report outlining the financial impact of ensuring a minimum wage of $15 per hour for all employees of Halifax Regional Municipality, Halifax Public Libraries, as well as employees of multi-district facilities, regardless of employment status, that is covering part-time, casual, seasonal, and so on, to be implemented no later than April 1st, 2023. This report should be completed in time to inform the 23-24 budget process.
Second.
Thank you very much, Councillor Morris. I'm not sure that that motion is quite in order as worded. I think it would be that the Audit and Finance Standing Committee has to recommend that Halifax Regional Council direct the CAO, but otherwise
we can ask for a staff report.
Fair enough. I saw Councillor Purdy motion towards something, and I see Jerry has his hand up. Go ahead, Jerry.
Yeah, just on the chair's point, I would recommend that the report go back to regional council, and don't like to do this too often, step outside the committee's mandate on financial matters, but with the motion that's coming forward, it would likely have some other impacts that we need to consider as well, just around collective agreements and things like that. So just I think it's would be more appropriate to go right to regional council.
Well, and I appreciate that, Jerry, except that we don't have to go to regional council to ask for the staff report, and I understand your reasoning for it, but I will challenge that. And I would like, if our solicitor is on the phone, to say whether we have to or not, because my understanding of Administrative Order 1 and the charter is that a committee can ask for a staff report.
Go ahead, John.
Chair, through the committee, yes, a committee can ask for a staff report within its mandate. I think what the chair and Jerry is indicating is that this is likely going to be something that goes quite a bit beyond the pure financial side. It has labor and other implications. So the report you get back may not be very helpful if it simply does not or is not able to address the rest of the issues that are there. So, I mean, I would leave it up to the CAO and or Jerry as his representative, but this is likely got quite a bit more hair on the ball, as it were, than simply looking at the financial implications.
Well, I mean, I guess it doesn't matter. 6 one way, half a dozen the other. But I'm fine with that. So I would, everything being the same, recommend that the Audit and Finance Standing Committee recommend that Halifax Regional Council direct the CAO to prepare blah, 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 blah.
Okay, thank you. I would see that as a friendly amendment. Councillor Morse, would you?
Yes, I do.
Beautiful. Thank you. That is the motion that is on the floor. Go ahead, Councillor Cleary.
So quickly, and I've got an amendment to add to this, which I'm going to fix up while I'm doing this. So the idea here is obviously the provincial government is moving to increase minimum wage to $15 per hour by April 1st, 2024. And as some questions were asked to our staff, and I believe it was Denise Schofield that answered them with regard to what we're currently paying. So when we look at our multi-district facilities, we look at our own rec facilities, we look at libraries. Sometimes we hire folks casually, part-time, and we pay them kind of the market rate. So if a job for a summer counselor is 13 or 14 bucks an hour, that's what we're paying them. And I think as we have been moving in our procurement process to a living wage, as we have been talking about with our own staff, paying appropriately, it would be, I think, it would look bad for the municipality to simply wait for the province has been just moving on this way too slow over the last decade to increase minimum wages, that we get there before they do. Also, and this will speak to an amendment I'll bring forward, but I'd like to hear what other councillors have to say just about the $15 an hour. We're not talking about full-time permanent staff here. Most of them are already making in excess of this. We're talking about, a fitness instructor, for example, who might teach classes at 4 or 5 different facilities, being paid $14 an hour, or as a class cost, a fixed rate, and then it would depend on how many people sign up for a class. So I think it just behooves us to be paying people a fair amount and continue to move that up to a living wage. Although I do get the sense that living wage for if you're paying $21 an hour, $22 an hour, that's appropriate for say a full-time permanent position where you would expect someone to be earning a living wage to make a life for themselves. If you're, a student going to school, there are arguments on both sides of this to say, well, they have other sources of income, they have other supports and don't require the living wage. But anyway, we should at least be paying a minimum of $15 an hour and get there before the province does. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Cleary. Go ahead, Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councillor Cleary and Morse for the motion. I guess my biggest concern is that these are entities that are not run by HRM, right? So the governance model and what and how can HRM impact the salaries? I do know that we cover deficits from our multi-district facilities. I do know that they're run by very competent and hardworking volunteers and all of that kind of stuff. That's been my world for many, many, many years. But we're not involved in their how they set their budget, their operations, all of those kinds of things. And this would actually insert us into theirs. So I'm sure, I think what was that phrase? Somebody just used, more hair on the ball. Is that what John Trave said? So yeah, so I absolutely will support, because I think that it's information that we need to have, but I do think that it will be a very complicated path to get to. But in terms of getting everyone to $15 an hour, absolutely. So it would be, what is that path? So it would be interesting to see that report. I will look forward to it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Daigle-Gammon. Go ahead, Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yeah, thanks for this motion. That was my question too when I was reading this, just wondering about the MDFs and what that governance model, how we can force that to happen, but also concern about I guess what was mentioned already, the agreements, like oh my gosh, what's the word? Help me out. Negotiated wage agreements, union.
Collective
yeah, there you go. So how does that work? So I guess, so I'm gonna support this going for the report, but is it yeah, what are the implications? I'm just thinking, what are the implications? I mean, obviously, yes, we want people making $15 an hour, but what are the implications right now? So I guess I'm wary of this, because I don't know what is it more harm than good? Sometimes there's good intentions can not work out so good, but yeah, looking forward to a report for more information. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Morse. Sorry, Councillor Purdy. I saw Councillor Morse's name in the chat. Go ahead, Councillor Morse.
Just following up on Councillor Purdy's comments there. I know some of the MDFs are having trouble getting staff. They have many part-time staff. They're all making marginal wages and in part-time work. And if this was worked out. This could potentially make it easier for the MDS to provide programs and bring staff on and keep them on. Right now, I think in some cases at Canada Game Center, for sure, they're having trouble getting enough lifeguards and that sort of thing to run their programs.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Morse. Councillor Cleary, you are unmuted. Would you like to go ahead?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so here's an amendment. I fixed up the wording. So I'd actually like to add a part 2 to this. So I've taken the current motion and it's part 1. And so the second part is that I would move that we add that we also look at a report of ensuring a living wage. So, that 21 or 22, the CCPA calculation, which we've already adopted as part of our procurement policy, that we also ensure a living wage for all employees of Halifax Regional Municipality, the libraries and multi-district facilities, regardless of employment status, covering part-time, casual, seasonal, et cetera, to be implemented no later than April 1st, 2024. This report should be completed in time for the 24-25 budget process.
Second.
Well, thank you, Councillor Morse. So we are now talking about the new amendment, looking at the living wage. Go ahead, Councillor Cleary.
Well, essentially what this would do is to say, okay, let's move to $15 an hour next year. And then the year after, let's see what the impact would be if we were to go up to the living wage. And again, based on the discussions we've been having about living wage in general and how it applies to our procurement policy, we've exempted certain contracts and occupations, construction as an example. The intent is for, full-time permanent kind of jobs. But I think it behooves us to look at this and to say, if we are truly a progressive municipality and we do want, literally just a few minutes ago, we adopted a policy that if you make below a living wage, as a household, you're going to get extra tax break because we recognize that that's very little money. And so how can we say that on one side of our mouth and then on the other side say, but as a municipality, as an employer, we're not going to pay you that. So the irony would be we would actually be exempting some of our employees from paying their taxes because we recognize we don't pay them enough. What kind of employer would we be? If we were rebating our own employees because we refuse to pay them a living wage. So anyway, this will go to council, obviously, and have another discussion there. But I think we would need to be looking at this in a longer term, actually not even longer term, medium term. What are we going to do next year? What are we going to do the year after that? And we should have a plan in place to pay people a wage high enough that they can live off of. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Cleary. Go ahead, Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Thank you very much. Oh, another report we're going to love to read and look forward to. And I actually mean that seriously. I am going to love looking forward to reading it. I guess the caution again is, are they our employees? Right? So just the whole governance piece, are they our employees or not? Their MDFs are run by the nonprofit groups. And so and some parts I think we can figure that out. There's smart people within HRM and I do think that they will figure it out, but I do know that that's one of the hurdles that will have to be addressed in it. And I think the other thing is that we'll look to figure out about how do we progress to the living wage. I don't know. And then hopefully the report is going to say, what will that effect be on the tax rate? So how is this going to implement? Because we're talking about a new term in 2024-25. So yeah, it will be very interesting to see what that will be like and what will the implications be on the tax rate. And when you say all employees, Councillor Cleary, so we are talking about whether it's part-time, casual, term, or full-time. I just want some clarity. Are you thinking all of those? In some ways, I hope so, but I just want to be clear that it is about all employees. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Daigle-Gammon. I don't see any further names in the chat, Councillor. Go ahead, Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, yes, it's an amazing idea. I don't know, I feel trepidation about this. Every business person I've spoken to about this, because this is very interesting to me, this living wage concept, because it seems like yes, obviously amazing idea, but not one business owner has said that this is good because of the implications that this will cause. And how can we force MDFs to do this if they're not our employees? So I was wondering if we can vote on these two separately. I don't think I can vote in favor of this, although in theory, obviously you don't want to see people not being able to make a living wage, but I feel like the implications are not going to be great. So can we split this?
Yes, we can certainly split this. We are still discussing adding this to the main motion. So this is still the discussion on the amendment. But yes, should it pass and should it come back as the main motion, then yes, we can absolutely split it. I don't see any further speakers, so back to Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of comments around some of the discussion that was raised. So in terms of governance with the MDFs, we actually have agreements with each of the multi-district facilities. So we can actually, so for example, they are in our buildings. HRM owns the buildings that they're in. We would have obligations for certain kinds of maintenance and things regarding that. We take on their deficits, we take their surpluses. In the agreements, we force them to use our booking systems. Basically whatever terms we agree on is what we can do. So if we say you must pay your staff this much, we can actually put that in the agreement, say you must pay your staff this much. Just fair warning, I have a motion coming forward that HRM will take over all the MDFs, but anyway, that's a whole other discussion. And in terms of the unions and, the unions not liking this in collective agreements, we have very few collective agreements where we pay any employees less than $15 an hour, just to put that in perspective. And I can't imagine a union is going to fight us and go, no, we don't want you to pay our members more. That won't happen. So, it's only a matter of negotiating new agreements to pay them more, which I don't think they're going to fight us on. Call me crazy. So, in terms of the implications, there are very few other than what's it going to cost us and are we willing to pay that price? That's really the bottom line. And Councillor Purdy, as a business owner, we already pay more than $15 an hour and we pay most of our employees a living wage. So most employers in the region already do this. So it's not a huge deal. Only those who are trying to earn more profit by taking it out of the backs of their employees are concerned about this. And frankly, I'm not concerned about them. So anyway, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cleary. I don't see any further requests to speak in the chat, so are we ready for the question on the amendment? Okay, go ahead, Councillor Purdy.
All right, so by the amendment, you mean the living wage?
The living wage, adding the living wage to the main motion, yes.
Okay. May I just make one more question?
Absolutely, yep.
Or comment? So, yeah, the business owners I've been talking to are small business owners who are finding it difficult to pay their employees anyway. And they were saying that just means the price of their goods are going to have to go up too. So they're going to have to charge more for the price of goods. And yeah, I know, like I see pros and cons with both of these things. This is very difficult. So yeah, okay. And
thank you, Councillor Purdy. We have a question in the chat from Councillor Hensby on how is a living wage determined. I believe that was determined. There is a website that determines the living wage that we are using in reference for the remainder of the contracts that come in. And Councillor Cleary has posted that in the chat as well. Policyalternatives.ca/publication/report living-wages-nova-scotia 2021. Thank you very much for both of those, Councillors Hensby and Cleary. So seeing no further speakers in the chat, let's go with a question on the amendment. So all those in favor of the amendment, please signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. That amendment passes. It is now part of the main motion as per Councillor Purdy's previous request. We will be splitting the motion. Is there any chat on the, or any, are there any questions or comments on the main motion?
Question.
The question has been called on the main motion. So all in favor of part 1 of the main motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that passes. And all in favor of part 2 on the main motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. And all opposed say nay.
Nay.
Thank you very much, everybody. That passes as well. So we are moving along. The next item is the in-camera minutes from February 17th of 2022. Would someone be interested in moving those minutes?
Happy to move, Mr. Chair. Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Councillor Cleary. Do we have a seconder?
I'll second.
Thank you, Councillor Dago-Gammon. And if there is any discussion on these minutes, we need to go in camera. And if not, I guess reading out the motional, this is that the in-camera minutes of February 17th, 2022 be approved as circulated. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say nay. Great, thank you. There are no added items. Are there any notices of motion? Not seeing any, and there is no public participation in this meeting. Just as a reminder, anybody who wishes to speak at the Audit and Finance Standing Committee meeting would have to have registered by 4:30 p.m. on the day before, the business day before the meeting, which was yesterday. So there were no registered speakers. So the date of the next meeting is April 20th, 2022. And with that, can we have a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dago-Gammon. We stand adjourned.